Well, for more on China's smartphone makers, we are joined by Rebecca Fannin. She is the founder and editor of Silicon Dragon News, based in San Francisco. Rebecca, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Well, recent data by market research firm TrendForce shows that China's largest mobile phone maker, Huawei, lost about 0.1% of global market share in the third quarter of this year, falling to 9.1%, while other Chinese phone manufacturers saw their market share grow. Is Huawei still the company to watch in China when it comes to mobile phones?
Well, there's a whole bunch of up-and-comers, such as OnePlus, which has a separate branding name and it is offering low-cost phones. So I think Huawei is no longer just the only brand to watch in China. There's also ZTE, which is another major tech titan in China. But there's a whole bunch of up-and-comers in China that are moving up swiftly.
All right, so domestic competition nipping at their heels. Nevertheless, Huawei plans to surpass Apple and Samsung to become the world's #1 smartphone vendor in the next 5 years. That's a really ambitious goal if you look at the market share right now. Do you think Huawei stands a chance?
Well, if you're looking at the Western markets, I think it's going to be a very difficult challenge to do that. Huawei has a strike against it from some political upheaval and connected to the Chinese government, and is seen as being a foreign brand, and political sensitivity and Chinese government situation. So Huawei, even though it's selling its smartphones under a different brand name, it has an uphill battle, and it's going to have to break through a lot of barriers in order to unseat Samsung and Apple as a #1 smartphone marketer.
Right, so particularly in the West, I mean, do some of the other Chinese phone makers have these similar challenges when it comes to trying to tackle markets in the United States and Europe?
Well, ZTE, which is the other major China brand, has been marked with the same issue of China government connections, and so that's kind of seen as a negative in the Western market. And these brands really don't translate that well in the Western market either. Huawei, ZTE, these are unknowns in the Western world. It's very difficult to unseat an established brand with 3 times the market share that they have.
All right, well, obviously very challenging, but at the same time, they still have that goal to beat at least Samsung. I mean, how do you expect the recall of the Galaxy Note 7 to impact Samsung's reputation and sales in the fourth quarter?
Well, I think obviously it's going to go down somewhat, but Samsung has some other very hot selling phones that are out there. So right now, if you look at the Q3 sales, it hasn't impacted it much yet, but I'm certain that it will.
Okay, so if not Western countries, where is the biggest growth market for Chinese phone makers right now?
Well, India is looked at as a frontier market for the Chinese mobile phone makers. For instance, Xiaomi has gone into India, and it's now the number 3 selling brand in India. So this is a market that's very similar to China in terms of, a huge mobile market, fast growing, very young population, very attuned to new tech brands. So this is a market where the Chinese brands are going into, India, and I think other emerging markets too, but India is #1.
So in these emerging markets, what is their biggest selling point for the Chinese manufacturers?
I think it's low cost. Many of these Chinese makers have government support, and they manufacture in Shenzhen. And they sell directly to the consumer, so they bypass the channels, the normal channels. So these are very strong points. Cost is a very major convincing point.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, lastly, is now the time ripe, though, for global ambitions? Because it seems to be that really what's driving the market is people updating their phones. It's not about really attracting new consumers to smartphones. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I would say most everyone who wants a smartphone or a mobile phone already has one. So we're dealing with a replacement market, and you're not going to have the kind of sales growth that you had in the beginning. And there's going to be more market share rivalry between brands and up-and-comers that can promise new bells and whistles. For instance, Liaco just entered the Western market, and they're introducing 2 new phones to the Western market with connected sound, the connected partnerships for music and entertainment. So you have to add some bells and whistles in order to compete today.
You got to really up the game. Well, thank you so much for joining us. That was Rebecca Fannin, founder and editor of Silicon Dragon News.